Welcome to Duck Season Somewhere podcast. This episode is brought to you by the following sponsors. GetDucks.com, your proven source for the very best waterfowl hunting adventures. Argentina, Mexico, 6 whole continents worth. For 2 decades, we've delivered real duck hunts for real duck hunters. And USHuntList.com, because the next great hunt is closer than you think. Search our database of proven U.S. and Canadian outfits. Contact them directly with confidence. Trust is earned. By the numbers, 121 waterfowl subspecies bagged on 6 continents, 20 countries, 36 U.S. states, and growing. I spend upwards of 225 days per year chasing ducks, geese, and swans worldwide. And I don't choose shotguns for the brand name or the cool factor. Y'all know me way better than that. I've shot Benelli for over 2 decades. I continue shooting Benelli shotguns for their simplicity, utter reliability, and superior performance. Whether hunting near home or halfway across the world, that is the stuff that matters. Sit means sit and stay until it doesn't. No matter how well or how often trained, retrievers want those ducks as badly as we do, maybe even more. Chardog might be titled, but she's still just a dog. I'm over 50 years old and I still do dumb stuff, trust me. Retrievers are family. I wouldn't endanger my children near heavy traffic, and I'm not going to risk my dog jumping in front of blazing guns either. Gundog Outdoors' patented quick-release safety system is fully adjustable, tethers to any blind or stand, has titanium stakes for frozen ground, and a quick-release marine-grade shackle to quickly release Fido when the smoke clears. Visit gundogoutdoors.com. Connect with them on Instagram at Gundog Outdoors to see their growing line of Gundog safety and performance products. Enter hashtag GetDucks to receive 15% discount off of your first order. Boss Shot Shell's copper-plated bismuth tin alloy is the good old days again. Steel shot's come a long way in the past 30 years, but will never, ever perform like good old-fashioned lead. Say goodbye to all that gimmicky, high recoil, compensation, science, hype, and hello to superior performance. Know your pattern, take ethical shots, make clean kills. That is the boss way. The good old days are now. It really is duck season somewhere for 365 days per year. Duck season somewhere takes me year-round to worldwide destinations where I visit with the most interesting people. I'm your host, Ramsey Russell. Join me here to listen to those conversations. Welcome back to Duck Season Somewhere. Today I'm in Brandon, Mississippi. I'm watching Chardog stretched out in front of the fireplace, although it ain't terribly cold. It's about 45 or 50 degrees right now as we're recording. And today's special guest is my buddy Eric Smith from Jamestown, North Dakota. How are you, Eric?
I'm good, Ramsey. How you doing?
Good. And now look, how cold is it right now in North Dakota?
I think we're looking at about 5 degrees outside right now, but the wind is whipping, so I think it's more of what we talk about in the Northland is of wind chill. It feels like it's about minus 25 out there right now.
Minus 25 real feel.
Yep.
No thing. You know, it reminds me. I know. I was just telling you before we recorded. Right after college, I got offered a temporary appointment in North Dakota. They're in Jamestown working for the research center, and one of the last questions he asked me was, how's a Southern boy going to do up here in the wintertime? And I said, well, I don't know, but probably about as well as you would do down here in my summertime. And he laughed and said, well, you know, y'all are humid down there. And I've been to Vicksburg, Mississippi, and had never hardly been as cold as when I was in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And just because that humidity gets into it. But I'm going to tell y'all, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if I could winter minus 25 real feel. What do you do on a day like today, Eric, when it's that cold?
Oh, just go for a walk in some shorts and take the dogs out.
Yeah. Yeah.
we're born and bred. We're born and bred for this stuff. We evolved in it. No, you typically hunker down and do a podcast with Ramsey Russell, I guess, is probably a good thing to do on a day like today.
That sounds like a good plan for today. Be up in the warm and do something like that. Well, I met you, Eric, there at Jeff Palaio's. We were shooting divers, and which was a real unique perspective or experience for me in North Dakota, because most folks hunt the fields and chase the puddle ducks and the geese. And Jeff and y'all are set up and are freaking diver purist. And beautiful hunt, especially the way Jeff does it with those antique blocks and all that good stuff out there soaking. But I just never will forget sitting in the blind, like talking in between the volleys, and hearing you talk about bluebills. And I was under the understanding that bluebills are practically an endangered species. The limit in Mississippi this year was 1. The limit in many places around the country was 1. And I can remember decades ago hearing that those birds were eating zebra mussels and really having some problems. And so when I heard you begin to talk about them, it really piqued my interest. You've got a background in bluebills, don't you?
Yeah, I got into wildlife as a profession strictly because of bluebills. I mean, there've always been sort of a species I've been interested in. I got involved strictly because they were, there was, when I first started getting interested in science and what was going on with bluebills and their populations, it was a big topic. I mean, it still is a big topic in the waterfowl world, but there was a big concern that there was really no good explanations for the decline that we saw in lesser Scaup populations.
So you're a wildlife biologist by training.
Yep.
You came into the field with a passion for bluebills, but I know from having talked to you that passion, you're what I call a hook and bullet biologist. A lot of us that went through school, a lot of the field biologists that I know today and work with and hunt with, they're like myself. I came through wildlife, but I was hook and bullet. My origins were hunting and fishing back when, and that just kind of translated into an interest in wildlife management. Let's talk about how you grew up and how you formed such an interest in bluebills and in Scaup. Where did you grow up, Eric?
Yeah, I grew up on an area of the country called the Iron Range in Minnesota. So it's northern Minnesota, known for its iron mining. And yeah, how that relates to bluebills. I mean, anybody that's grew up there or hunted in northern Minnesota, especially back in the heyday of the bluebill, we'll call it. There were lakes that I grew up hunting with my dad, and even before I could actually hunt. I mean, I remember being a toddler and my dad coming home with lots and lots of bluebills with him and my uncle and their friends. They would come home with piles and piles of bluebills because Lake Winnebagochish, also known as Lake Winnie to most, was a really popular area to hunt bluebills because there were a lot of bluebills that used that lake. Mm-hmm. So, go ahead.
Talk about some of those early memories. Do you still remember your first duck hunt or your first duck?
Yeah, I remember my first. I remember some. I have memories of being a toddler. I remember my dad putting me in a snowmobile suit to keep warm, and I remember walking around on the sandy beaches of Lake Winnebagochish, and my dad and my uncle Randy, who was alive at the time, hunting a lot of ducks, and so my cousins and I did that a lot. So a lot of my early memories are of big water and seeing these big wads of ducks come in. So I guess that's why diver hunting gets me so excited and why I'm so interested in diving ducks as a whole. And then I remember my first duck my first duck that I shot, when I could finally shoot a gun. I had a 20 gauge single shot that first duck I shot was a Drake ringneck duck, which is a Minnesota staple. There's a lot of ringneck ducks that are harvested in Minnesota, a lot that breed there, a lot that migrate through there. So Yeah, I water whacked him too, Arkansas style, like you guys do down south. I mean, that's what a lot of us youths do. But if I could hit at 9 years old a ringneck duck on the wing, I probably would have just got into. I would have been competing against Tom Knapp or something like that because they're a hard duck to hit.
Ringnecks are fun to shoot because they are freaking black and white flashes across the water. They are a ton of fun, but they're fast.
Yeah,
And I've shot plenty of ringnecks down here in my life. I can tell you that. And I was looking at some old pictures of my dad when he was a little boy, and my uncle with my granddad. And it's one of the very few photos, black and white photos of their childhood that I've seen with them hunting. And looking at the board where the birds were hung up, there were mallards and gadwalls and whatnot, but there was quite a few ringnecks. They shot them back then too, where they hunted. And so how would you and your dad hunt these divers? Well, I mean, y'all were targeting divers back in those days. Just ringnecks and bluebills. I'm assuming some redheads.
Yeah, I mean, we were out to kill ducks like any duck hunter. We want to get out there and kill ducks. And back then in the 80s and going into the 90s, mallards were a prize always, and they still are in that part. Just because you don't have necessarily as many mallards, but my dad loved wing shooting. That was his thing, and I'd be hard pressed to find another species. Between lesser Scaup, ringneck ducks, and goldeneyes and redheads. I mean, throw them all in the mix. Those are some really fantastic wing shooting birds, and it's what we had a lot of. So, a lot of times we basically just go look for good activity on some of these medium-sized to larger lakes of we didn't really care the species, but obviously we were really interested in shooting bluebills and things like that. And a lot of times we'd a pair of us would just go out in a canoe and we'd find we had like particular islands that we'd like to hunt, and I really got an addiction to bluebills when you're on this small pothole lake in northern Minnesota and you're on an island and you got a couple of blocks out there, and then it seems like out of nowhere all of a sudden you've got these rockets just coming into your decoys in pretty good numbers. I mean, flocks of 25, things like that. And that did it for me as a kid, Ramsey. Like the sound of them working, just the way they just lose altitude whichever way they want. That's the kind of stuff that I always think back on whenever I'm hunting. If it's a slow day or I'm not hunting and I'm really thinking about hunting, I often go back to those early memories of why I got into this, and why I really like hunting so much. Not just the biology part of it and why I got into being a biologist, but just why I even hunt birds in the first place. What do I like about it? And
right.
those thoughts always come up. It's just it's spending time with my dad and my family members, and just the camaraderie of it all. You pick up on that at such a young age, and it becomes so important to a lot of us.
That I agree. That is one of the constants in duck hunting worldwide, nationwide, everywhere I've ever been is just beyond the trigger pull, beyond the hunt. No matter what species, it's just the whole camaraderie, the social experience, the food, the culture, the whole thing. It's real constant among duck hunters and duck camps. It's just a staple of it all. And what I find so interesting, and we talked about this out there with Jeff hunting on his lake. Where I'm from, here in the deep south, Scaup and divers in general are not a primary target. They're an odd bird. They're what you shoot generally to pick up. You limit. You get 4 mallards or 4, whatever, to
Mm-hmm.
make your bag. It's not the bread and butter duck. It's just not in the deep south. And I've heard them called, quote, shit ducks, unquote. I don't call them that, but I've heard them called that. And that is to say in some circles, Eric. Anything that's not a mallard, is that. And I don't ascribe to that road, but that's what I've heard them call. But then as you start to travel around the United States, especially up in the northern tier, that is a scaup or a pretty dang big deal. I know Lee Chose, my good buddy Lee Chose. I've shot many different species of ducks with that man. He loves bluebills, and it goes back to hunting those mid to large size water bodies in Minnesota with his dad, and his dad was a bluebill guy. That's what they did when the weather kicked up and everything got right. They were all about those bluebills, which reminds me of this. You know, you hear that old wives' tale. I've heard it said my whole life that, you know, rainy and snow and windy and just that whole nastiness is what you want for duck hunting. And it's been my experience in a lot of places that I hunt for puddle ducks. That ain't what I want. I want enough wind to steer them. I want enough cold to make them move and make the birds migrate, but I want sunshine. And, you know, if you get up in y'all's part of the world in them great big water bodies, those birds will raft up out in the middle of nowhere unless you've got that real inclement weather to kick them off into the coves, kick them off into the shorelines. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And what really drives them there, you know, if you're a mallard hunter or a goose hunter and you understand how you're field hunting these birds, and the same sort of things drive the diving ducks, right? You know, a lot of these species that we're hunting, their optimal feeding range is 3 to 6 feet, but they're out there rafting up and who knows how deep. You know, you think they're feeding out there? No, they're not. They're resting, just like a mallard will go out to roost.
Yep.
But they're going to come in. They might, you know, in North Dakota here, they might leave the wetland that you're on. That you know, you got to do your scouting because they might be on this wetland, but they might be rafting out there and they're going up to the smaller, shallower ones neighboring to go feed because there's better food sources in some of those. Especially when you think of prairie wetlands that are sort of relatively unaltered, they tend to have better food sources than some of these deep, what we call consolidation basins that are just larger because of not only a wet cycle, but then, you know, past drainage practices. So, you know, so they're really not that different. But if you go back to talking about shit ducks, you know, I think a lot of that, you hear that stuff, but it really comes down to cooking skills. I think a lot of hunters out there, especially waterfowl hunters, don't really know how to cook duck. So it leads me to believe that they don't know how to cook a steak either because, yeah, some of these birds have some differences. But as far as birds that don't taste quite that good, I wouldn't put bluebills very low on the list. They're actually...
I've eaten some great ones.
Yeah, they're just like any duck, Ramsey. I mean, you shoot me 10 mallards and I might get 1 or 2 out of there that taste a little funky just for whatever reason. Maybe they're in poor body condition. You know, that their muscles are a little bit more stressed from the point of migration they're at or whatever it may be. Yeah. But I mean, you know, you and I have this talk. We always talk about how people give shovelers a bad name. You're a big shoveler lover, and I love it too. And man, especially if we're doing the breast out method, I cook these the way I cook anything else, and you'd have a hard time telling the difference between a bluebill and a gadwall, you know, other than the initial color. Yeah,
I agree entirely. And, you know, speaking of cooking, cooking is becoming somewhat of a lost art. Cooking wild game, cooking ducks especially, as compared to your dad, my granddad's era, that is becoming a little bit of a lost art. And, you know, and it really is a quantum leap to go from frozen pizza to waterfowl. I mean, it's a quantum leap to cook ducks right if you're more accustomed to microwaves or frozen pizzas or even just grilling steaks. I mean, you know, and but I've eaten some good scaup. Scaup are to me darker than a mallard.
Yep.
But they're good, and if they've been feeding on some good stuff, they're very good to eat. Divers are harder to skin than a puddle duck. I mean, their skin's a lot tougher now. You know, ringneck, man, that's a booger.
You ever try to pluck the breast feathers off a ringneck duck? Good luck.
I know, man. It's but anyway, well, tell me this. Okay, so you grow up hunting through high school with your dad. Then what? And then how'd you crawl further down this bluebill rabbit hole?
Yeah, it was kind of it wasn't like a straight path, you know. Maybe, you know, some people have that in their life where they just got a straightforward path, and that's fine and dandy. I'm just sort of a drifter. I'm a jack of all trades. I like a lot of different things, and I mean, you know, when I got out of high school, you know, the duck hunting really wasn't that good, and I didn't duck hunt quite as much as I used to. And I got involved in other things. I was always interested in rock and roll and music, and I got together with some guys, and we played in bands together for years and did a little touring, and you know, kind of thought maybe we'd make something out of that. And so I spent a lot of time, you know, kind of, you know, traveling around the country and a lot of time, you know, practicing, you know, music and things like that. So that was my passion at the time. And, I was in a band with a guy, and we had sort of, I think at that time we had kind of called it quits in that particular band for a while. And Mikey was he's a good friend of mine, and he wanted to go duck hunting. I'd always talk about duck hunting and fishing and stuff with him, and he didn't do a whole lot. He really liked to fish when he was growing up, but he didn't get to do a whole lot of duck hunting stuff, And I remember one time I took him out to one of my favorite lakes, actually the one I was talking about, some of my childhood memories there of being on an island. I actually took him to that lake after I hadn't hunted out there for years and years. And I had no idea what to expect. The only real recon on any of that I had was talking to my dad, because he was still, trying to hunt, even though a lot of his boys were out of the house. Certainly his hunting boys were out of the house. And I brought him out there, and, we shot whatever came in. But, we shot mallards, we shot bluebills, we shot goldeneyes, we shot mergansers. And, it was just awesome to introduce him to that, because now, ever since then, he's been a pretty diehard waterfowler. And that just kind of got me back into the game of I should never hung this up. And not that I really hung it up permanently, but I just wasn't doing it to the degree that made me happy, And so from there, he and I were kind of farting around all the time, just drinking beers and BSing and fishing together and hunting. And we kind of got it in our heads like, hey, both of us are still young and we're still single. I kind of want to go to school for wildlife, and I'd really like to get into, waterfowl and waterfowl management and waterfowl biology. And he kind of thought the same thing. Yeah, I'm going to get into something like that, So we actually both saved up our money and quit our jobs and took our girlfriends with us and kind of got down the path of going to school for wildlife. And one of the first things I did, because for probably one of the first times in a while, I knew what I wanted to do, and I got on the phone and I called up a researcher with LSU who's a big bluebill guy, and he's since retired. His name's Al Afton.
Dr. Al Afton, you're right. Yep.
Yep. And I cold called Al out of nowhere, and just kind of said, hey, I'm looking for some guidance. If I want to go to, I'm in a wildlife program now, but if I want to work with ducks, what do I do? Just give me some pointers. And he's like, oh man, get as much experience as you can with waterfowl people and network. He's like, what you're doing now? And, so Al's a really good mentor to a lot of people. And he invited me down. He said, hey, if you're serious and you want to drive all the way down to Pool 19 on the Mississippi River in March and donate your spring break, then you can come down and help me ban ducks. So that's what Mike and I did, is we made the plans I said, Mike, hey, he invited me down. I'm like, let's go. So that kind of got me started with at least getting my hands on birds. It certainly got me involved in banding Scaup. And it was cool, man, because the timing of it all just kind of worked out, because the first time I met Al was sort of the front end of the banding operation for the year. So we were helping him do a lot of the legwork, like the scouting for birds and getting traps ready and setting traps. And it was literally just free time with a Scaup expert to, just driving around every day and just to pick his brain about everything, So I really appreciated his time answering all my questions. Some were probably pretty bush league at the time and stuff, but Al answered them all, and he really kind of got me thinking about this Scaup issue, and just in general.
Out in those Louisiana marsh areas, a lot of South Louisiana Scaup, Dogre, they call them, are a big deal. I mean that now you get down that part of deep South that they like Scaup. I mean that's kind of one of their big deals, and But Al was doing a lot of Dr. Afton was doing a lot of bluebill research, wasn't he? I mean, doing a lot.
Yeah. I mean,
what was the scope of his study with those bands?
Well, with the band specifically, when I first met Al, he was actually putting satellite transmitters in females as well. So he was just kind of trying to sort of map out the migration corridor of females as they left Pool 19 and made their way towards the prairies, or, well, essentially at the time we were thinking breeding grounds, but turns out a lot of them go to the prairies in North Dakota and South Dakota. Ultimately, I mean, any banding data that you have when you're banding a lot of birds, that's used for, harvest estimates, survival, and population estimates and all that kind of stuff. So
I remember one. I believe I remember reading or becoming aware of some research that Dr. Afton was doing based on. I think some of those telemetries was a lot of. It was surprising to know or find out that a lot of the Dougherty, a lot of the bluebills were rafting and finding sanctuary way offshore during the day. Way offshore. I think I remember.
Yeah.
It shocked me to learn.
Yeah.
What do you? I mean, it's like they were coming in and feeding at night, feeding early in the morning, maybe catch them late and eat them. But man, they're spending their daytime hours way offshore.
Yeah.
And so what were some of the other topics and some of his other areas of research regarding Scaup?
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of all over the place with Scaup. He's done a lot of stuff. I say one of the big ones is stuff that I'm more familiar with because I ended up having one of Al's former PhD students be my graduate co-advisor for my master's. So a lot of it. So I guess to frame it in everything, it's sort of everybody. There was a lot of research being headed to sort of try to understand the Scaup population decline. And I know we haven't fully got into that yet, but the part that Al was really focusing on, he subsequently got Mike Anto, the guy I'm referring to head this up as his PhD work, because they were looking a lot at the spring condition hypothesis is what they coined it as, but they're really looking at like the condition of these females as they migrate through, with the idea that, you know, maybe some of this habitat in these mid-stopover sites and on the prairie and things like that aren't necessarily, or they've changed enough that the food sources aren't quite as good as they once were, and then that would subsequently affect females, right? Mm-hmm. So I came on after that, after Mike was done and stuff, and I didn't focus directly on that, but no, they certainly had some compelling research that they did together, regarding this, and we sort of questioned.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I just say it just brought up a lot of questions of like, okay, well, you know, are females in poor body condition than they were historically, and they do have evidence to show that they were in some historic areas, showing lower lipids overall than they had in previous decades.
Because as I understand it, waterfowl, North American waterfowl, they molt twice. Feathers are a very, very demanding replace. They need a lot of nutrition to molt. That requires, but then the females also have to produce eggs, which is an enormous energy sink. And so the higher their energy levels, the higher their lipid levels, whatever you want to call it, the more eggs they're going to produce, the more successful, the more viable those eggs are going to be. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the better fit individuals, they're going to tend to have better success than others. And
right.
Yeah, that holds true for many duck species. But yeah, the question was about Scaup, and they're a difficult species to study, just given their nesting ecology. They're a remote nester. Most commonly nesting in the boreal forest, in the western boreal forest of Canada. So they're pretty remote. We do have some that nest here in North Dakota, particularly on the Missouri River Coteau, and then they nest in prairie Canada and prairie parkland habitat as well. But the bulk of them are boreal forest nesters. So
that's crazy, isn't it? What
Mm-hmm.
what is their nesting habitat like then? I mean, what do the Missouri Coteau and especially the boreal forest have in common? They're not. I think. How are they?
Yeah.
What is their nest area different than, say, a mallard or a pintail or a teal?
Well, it depends on which teal you're talking about. If you're talking about blue wingers, it's not really all that different. Scaup prefer to nest in grass cover, so they would be similar to the ducks you described before, mm-hmm. versus, say, some of their relatives, the canvasback or the redhead, which are over water nesters. And ringneck ducks. Ringneck ducks primarily like to, I would call them an overwater nester, but it's sort of bizarre because they like those sort of bog type wetlands that have like floating sedge.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have like floating mats and there'll be sedge on top, and that's where they typically like to breed. So they're different in Scaup in that respect too. So you think you would find some similarities, right, between like what they would like to nest in? Sure, the prairie's got a lot of grass, and if there's good wetlands, so that's why we see them here. But there's also those types of habitats in the boreal forest and sub-taiga as well.
That's all very interesting. Well,
Mm-hmm.
let me ask you this: what happened to Scaup between the time you were growing up, your dad was growing up, your granddad was growing up, Lee Chose's dad was out there coming in with lots of bluebills to now? I mean, obviously, as I understand it as a layman reading the popular literature, Scaup population are practically endangered. There aren't. I mean, when you've got a limit of one, you got to be worried as a sportsman that there are no birds. And it's been that way for a while, and I do remember hearing years ago that cargo ships had brought in a zebra mussel, and it was noxious, and it was taking over the Great Lakes, and these birds were eating all these zebra mussels, and I don't know, getting toxins or something and dying. I mean, so Scaup in a bad way, as I understand it. Is that correct, Eric? Their population is virtually nothing right now.
That is not correct. So that is sort of, if you're not really in tune with like the science, or if you really follow like the population surveys and things like that, if you just kind of hear what duck hunters are saying, that you might be led to believe that. Now, Scaup are certainly in no danger of going extinct. I don't have the exact numbers for this year, and I don't know if COVID complicated that enough, but we're somewhere in the last 15 years or so. We've been seeing the Scaup breeding population be somewhere in that neighborhood of, I'd say somewhere in the 3.8 to 4.5 million estimate.
Really?
Yeah. So
how would that compare just ballpark to 20, 30 years ago?
So so
that's 3.5 to 5 million Scaup is a lot of them.
Yeah, so that's that 20 to 30 year decline that we're talking about from what we see in our best population estimates from back in the day. We saw sort of a peak in the late 1970s with, depending on the estimates you look at, it was probably in the breeding population was estimates were somewhere between 6.5 to 7 million.
Okay.
So contrast that with a 3.8 to 4.5 or whatever it is today. It's really hard to trust estimates of Scaup, really for any species, but particularly Scaup in the way that we, if we're talking about May pond counts, because their migration chronology sort of, depending on the year, Scaup might not be well represented in those May pond counts. So therefore your estimates would have a little bit more margin for error in them, right? So, but yeah, we saw a big a shift. Well, I wouldn't say we call it a long-term decline. It was 20 to 30 years before we really saw sort of what it appears to be somewhat of a stabilization right now. And so that prompted a lot of the research that we were talking about. A lot of working groups and a lot of really, really good duck scientists really trying to come up with some reasons why. Do we know why? Definitively, no, we don't.
Well, my first question is: I understand margin for error doing pond counts. Has the pond count methodology or extensiveness of it has it changed at all since the numbers declined in the last 20 years? Has there been? Is it consistent? Is the May pond count survey methods consistent with then and now, or has there been any change in that too?
I wouldn't be able to speak to that necessarily,
Okay.
Ramsey, of any sort of adjustments. I mean, there's other folks that would be able to speak to that better than I could. Is to the best of my knowledge, I don't think so. Any major tweaks or anything like that. But, certainly if we think about a decline in birds, it's not to the point where I don't want anybody to get the idea that they're endangered. We do have a lot of Scaup out there.
I was being facetious. I know the punchline of this thing, so I was being facetious. Yeah. But because when a federal agency step down to the states has got the limit pegged at 1. Not 6, not 5, not 4, 1. You got to wonder. You have to wonder, well, something's going on. And I've read in popular literature, not in scientific journals, but I've read in popular literature that has led me to believe that they were a imperiled species in the waterfowl world. And in meeting with you, in a duck blind up at Jeff's, I just realized that was not true. So I was being facetious, saying, endangered species.
I got you. I'm following you.
I mean, I've been this year over to to North Dakota, but also to around Lake Erie, and I've seen, when you get off into Scaup country, you see massive rafts of Scaup. I mean, jillions of them, bazillions of them, gobs of them everywhere. I mean, when you get off into Scaup habitat this day, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah. I mean, they're sort of a cryptic species for humans as a whole. Unless we're Scaup hunters or duck hunters, we're not a lot of times going to where Scaup are and would be in ID. I mean, somebody lives in the city, a duck is a duck, right? For most of them, unless they're like an avid birder or avid hunter themselves. But again, I mean, they're not necessarily a species that, I mean, they're not a mallard, they're not a habitat generalist, they don't have the potential of nesting on your dock in Minnesota. It's just not there. So and they're a big water duck in general. So they're using big bodied water where they might be out there far enough that you just don't see them.
What is their principal food source? I mean, what do Scaup eat a lot of vegetation? I know they eat some invertebrates and protein too, but they've got a good diet, don't they? They just like it at deeper water.
They do. The research has shown that they'll eat a lot of dang things, right? But I would say, I guess, my opinion, that the Scaup is a habitat specialist. Number one, they're wetland obligated. They need wetlands. They don't have they're not going to Farmer Joe's cornfield to get anything. But they're a specialist when it comes to feeding. Like, they're really good at catching aquatic inverts, and particularly amphipods. Some people call them freshwater shrimp or whatever. But yeah, they're a shrimp-like creature. We'll just say that much. But they're called amphipods, and that's what they're really good at catching, and they really, really like to eat those. Now, if you look at diet studies of Scaup, depending on where they're at, I mean, boy, they'll eat just about anywhere. They'll eat a lot of different things. You and I have talked about catfish ponds, and I've talked about that with other biologists from, certainly guys from Mississippi State that were doing waterfowl stuff down there, and hunters down there. They're like, yeah, if you want to shoot your bluebills, you go to the catfish ponds. They're in there eating stuff. I can't say exactly what they're eating. I would suspect they might be eating some minnow species, but it's just all depends on what's there. When times get tough for any of us, we're going to eat. I don't like to eat at fast food restaurants, but if I'm out on the road, sometimes I have to.
Desperate times calls for desperate measures. Yep.
Yeah. Right. But I think in a perfect world, if Scaup had these beautiful, pristine prairie wetlands that they evolved with, when they evolved, they had, they'd much rather do that, I would think, if I was a Scaup. But they got to eat, and they're pretty good at finding food sources. They're really social feeders and stuff like that, and they really cue. And you find that out when you start observing them in large groups, and when you're trying to catch them, certainly. When
we talk Scaup, I'm thinking lesser Scaup, because that's what I'm most familiar with. That's what I've seen the most. But you do have a greater Scaup, slightly different. And I know the first thing I noticed on the very few times that a dog brings in a greater Scaup, I noticed that broad bill. His bill is different. And then I'll always pull out the wing, and I see the white extending off into the primaries, and it's a little bigger. But when we talk Scaup in this conversation, are they all just kind of lumped together?
They are managed as a sort of a lump together, because graders and lessers, yes, they are different species genetically. You've described the key characteristics that we look for morphologically to tell them apart. They both use boreal habitat to nest. It really comes down to, like, the greater Scaup seems to be more of a, I would say, Great Lake, large lake, coastal species, where a lot of our lesser Scaup use the interior of the United States to migrate through. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. From a migratory bird standpoint, they're all managed together. But the bulk of the population is made up by lesser Scaup.
I see.
Eric, I don't know what I haven't looked at the estimates on graders. I think the BPOP estimate on graders is somewhere around 600,000, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's somewhere in that ballpark. So quite a few more lesser Scaup than there are grader.
Yeah, there are, and I've seen the greater Scaup out in San Francisco Bay. I've encountered them this year at Lake Erie, also on the eastern seaboard, and I don't know. I guess because I put my hands on so few of them, they're kind of a prize. They're a beautiful bird. Yeah. They're a notably heavier bird than a lesser Scaup. And don't get me wrong, I like lesser Scaup too. But well, Eric, let's get down to me the question. Why is the limit only one? And what might the limit be in a perfect world or something, and why?
Oh, sure. Man, if I could answer that, I would have a really high-paying job with the federal government. Ramsey, it's not an easy question, and it's complicated, and it's not. To be fair to Joe Duck Hunter, who's like, man, why isn't one duck? What that's just ridiculous, and they don't know anything about the science that's out there. They're saying, man, this sucks. And then you contrast that with the other side of the story of, the Fish and Wildlife Service manages migratory birds. And if you really think about it, they're trying to please the hunters as much as they can while responding to changes in populations or habitat or anything like that. So they've got a tough task because they're asked to do that. They're asked to make people happy and give us a lot of ducks, but you got limited information. Like you get harvest information, and you want to manage all that. So it's tough from their perspective, and it's tough from a duck hunter's perspective because they're just sitting there going, why? And the scientists might be saying, hey man, we've been looking at this stuff. Why is anyone not acting on this? So it's not easy, and there's no, I wouldn't say I'd point blame at anyone or anything like that. But in my experience, coming from the scientific perspective, I studied Scaup, and I know a lot of the Scaup literature that's out there, and I know a lot what's kind of been examined, especially during this population decline. And, in my experience, I mean, I've seen science out there that's pretty compelling that says, that our hunter harvest, the birds that we shoot every year for Scaup, doesn't really add to the population mortality that's out there, right? So I started thinking about this, and I'm like, I'm thinking about what I've seen, right? And I've seen skewed sex ratios in my banding record the entire time. Now, there's a certain level of bias with mine because I'm catching them at a certain site and a certain point of migration. And I know for a fact that every year the males are going to be heavy up front. But and the females tend to lag behind a little. And we start catching what gets closer to a 1-to-1 sex ratio. I don't think it ever's quite gotten there, but later in the season we see that. And then that changes. But what we have for harvest information is, looking at a sex ratio a certain way, and that's got some bias to it. What I have has a little bit of bias to it, but I would say that, it's definitely skewed, and it's more than the harvest data, but we don't know exactly. So you and I have talked about the pintail problem before, and I think you've talked about the pintail problem a little bit on
that's right.
On some of your previous podcasts. So some of that stuff that you hear from some of the other duck biologists, and the guys that really know what they're talking about when it comes to some of these other species, and there's been talk about pintail's got a skewed sex ratio, and given their other characteristics, does it make sense to sort of let's shoot a few more drakes, and not that we ever harvest enough, it might not make a difference, but it certainly provides hunter opportunity, right? The same thing goes with Scaup. Can we shoot enough? Let's say we we said the same thing for Scaup. We're like, okay, let's shoot more Scaup. Let's do males. Let's shoot males. Maybe you can only, to be safe on regulations and keep accidents from happening, because some hens are going to die in the mix, right? When you're shooting that bluebills sometimes, and you're going to have missed IDs, and you're going to have the bird in the background fall out and type thing. If you did that, it's providing opportunity for hunters, and you're bringing down that sex ratio, or I should say, in theory, you're bringing down that sex ratio. Now, not to talk in circles, but like I said, there's compelling evidence that we don't harvest enough ducks to impact their population, right? So enough Scaup to impact their population. So it doesn't matter if we shoot a bunch. I bet we would never catch that number. We wouldn't impact it, but it would provide more opportunity.
Eric, here's what I'm getting at. Here's what is on my mind based on this conversation. I have a 1 Scaup limit with about 4 million birds. How does that compare to 2 redheads and 2 canvasbacks? Why is it 1 Scaup, 2 redheads, 2 canvasbacks? Are their populations equally as big?
No, they're not, and that's actually a question I get a lot. I think a lot of waterfowl biologists get that question in general. Is, hey, I thought there weren't that many canvasbacks. Why can we shoot 2 of those and only 1 bluebill? Or
how many
or
canvasbacks and redheads are there by comparison? Like we said, there's somewhere between 2.5 and 4 million Scaup. So what are we looking at by comparison for redheads and canvasbacks versus their limits?
Yeah, I just ballpark some numbers, because I don't know that which year I'd be quoting in the last couple of years of looking at it. But Scaup, we're looking right around 4 million. Canvasbacks, when I was banding them a lot, they were doing really well for their long term. I think they were around 750,000 back then. As a
less than estimate. 1 million.
Yeah, and then they're somewhere slightly below that. They've been pretty stable over time for the most part. And then redheads, for the best numbers out there, I mean, if you're talking about the stuff we get in the breeding survey, you're talking maybe a million birds ish, 1.2 million if I'm remembering right in recent numbers. But I've had conversations with guys about redheads before, and I just don't know. I'm not the person to talk to about redhead populations in particular, but there's other guys out there that are, and I don't know if we have a great handle on redheads in general. So I don't want to speak too much to redhead populations, but we've got smaller populations of those birds, and lesser Scaup are the most abundant diving duck in North America.
But see, that's what I'm having trouble getting my mind wrapped around here, Eric, is the fact that the most abundant poacher, the most abundant diver in North America, I've got a limit of 1 in most states. Yeah. But now I'm looking at a bird like a redhead that is 1/4 the population of Scaup, and the limit's 2. And there may be some dispute, you're saying, on what we really do know about that population. And now we go down to the absolute king daddy of them all, the canvasback, fewer than 1 million, and the limit's still 2. And so as a layman, as a hunter, I don't understand. Where are these numbers coming from? Do they got like a special diver model, and that's supposed to make some kind of sense? Because it makes absolutely positively no sense to me that I can only shoot 1 Scaup out of 4 million birds, but I can shoot 2 a day with 750,000 canvasbacks sitting out there, or 2 a day with 1 million. That makes absolutely no sense at all to me. So is there like a special diver model or something, or how are these numbers coming up? What are the models? What are the science behind all this?
Yeah, I mean, so it's the same for all ducks. With there's modifications, but there's not like a diver model. Like I mentioned to you before, I don't know if we'd mentioned it. I know I've talked to you about it a couple of times, that Scaup are poorly represented in May pond counts on certain years. It's misrepresented, I should say, because it just depends on the migration chronology from year to year. They're a late nester. So a lot of times in May, they're not where the breeding survey is happening. A large portion of them aren't. So they're just really underrepresented. So if you think about, redheads and canvasbacks, canvasbacks will migrate earlier than north to go nest than say Scaup will. So they may be better represented. So there may be more confidence in those estimates of the population, where the Scaup one, I'm shooting from the hip here of why these things would come about when I get asked this question. But it's like, maybe there's a little more dynamic, even though we think, Scaup populations have been relatively stable in recent years, in the last 12 to 14 years, probably. Maybe there's a little more dynamic in the long term. So they incorporate that when they're making those decisions. So it basically comes down to like less confidence in the Scaup estimates based on the things I've kind of brought up, versus more confidence in some of the other population estimates because they think they're getting better counts. Does that make sense?
Kinda. I'm not happy with it. I still don't understand if I've got
right.
If I've got 700,000 M&Ms in a jar, and I decide everybody can have 2 of them. Everybody that comes by and wants one every day for 60 days can have 2 of them. I don't understand how I've got 4 times or 5 times that many in the jar, and you can only get one. I can't get my mind.
Yeah.
Well, talk to me about how all this stuff is modeled or managed. I mean, is there like a one duck fits all model that all this adaptive harvest management is going through, or because you said there wasn't like a special diver model? It seems to me that divers are different than puddle ducks in terms of their life ecology and their management, their population dynamics. I mean, how is everything being factored?
Yeah, I mean, if you had to guess what species it's sort of modeled around, what would you guess as an educated man, as a smart duck hunter and biologist and training that you had in your life?
I'd guess that it'd be the omnipotent mallard duck, because I mean that's what's driving the band studies. When we were out there in Canada years ago banding, mallards were the targets. That's what I would guess, mallards.
Well, it sure as heck ain't the northern shoveler. We'll just say that much, right? Yeah.
No.
So yeah, I mean, there's I'm not saying anything new to anybody in the world that works with waterfowl, and a lot of duck hunters are educators. Like that's kind of the way it works. Is it a perfect system? It's not. No, I mean, especially if you're sort of a diver snob like I am, where I really kind of get fixated on these wetland obligate species that have different lives than some of the puddle ducks. It's problematic, and it's not perfect, but it's what we've got. Just the hope is that we get more adaptive with it. And I've always kind of brought up the question with just in conversation with people, other biologists and stuff, is like, is it too hard to, if we're really concerned about Scaup and their long-term trends, is it too hard to make sure that we're counting them in a different way to maybe get better estimates? Is there something mathematically that some really good statistician can do? I mean, other than what we're doing now to let us have more confidence in those estimates. But, like I said, the good science out there that's been done recently shows that it's not hunters. And we talked about the skewed sex ratio before in Scaup, and there is opportunity for the discussion to be able to shoot more Scaup.
I mean, you got to do what you got to do. You've got to do what you got to do with the budget you're given. I get that, but it just seems like it seems like disingenuous science to model all waterfowl species, all duck species, on a mallard which can make a living anywhere, from local parks to the plains of Saskatchewan, potholes, flooded timber. He's a habitat generalist, to, as you just described earlier, a Scaup that had a very, very specific nesting pattern, life pattern, production pattern, and a dietary habit. I don't see how you can manage all things on one very general duck. I just feel like I just feel like it's being. I just feel like it's. You might as well just guess.
Yeah, I mean it's.
I'm not beating up on nobody that's putting a lot of time and money into this, but I am. I mean, I'm like, wait a minute, this just sounds like a wild ass guess to me.
I mean,
you know way more about them than I do, and I'm just sitting here thinking, wait a minute. I've got 2 to 4 million Scaup, and I can shoot one, and 700,000 to 750,000 canvasbacks, and I can shoot 2. That don't make sense to me. And now I find out that maybe all of these forecasting models and it being predicated on a mallard, which can cut a living everywhere. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, Randy, and I've had this conversation. I've been asked this a lot by people, and I wish I had a great answer, but I kind of laid out the numbers there and like what the population trends kind of look like, and I still come back to that same question every time: is, well, why can't we be exploring the Scaup limits a little more for hunter opportunity? because we think that the good science out there shows that we probably got room to talk about that, and in my opinion, my personal opinion, it should not be one in North Dakota, Central Flyway. It shouldn't be really one anywhere really, but not all flyways are the same. They don't get the same numbers of birds coming through them. But
hunter harvest distribution, stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of Scaup, they're shot in the Mississippi Flyway. They make their way through the Central, but they'll end up in the Gulf Coast. And number one state for band recoveries for me has always been Louisiana. Yep. And I would think it's the same for the other couple of guys that have been banning Scaup over the last few decades. It always seems to be Louisiana, and in other states in the Mississippi Flyway. So, what I want to get at about all this, that we, I was having good discussions about this, and that's good. That's good for science to have these sort of discussions, right? And it's good for management and all those things. But the thing I've always brought up in talks with people is, I mentioned, why can't we maybe count Scaup a little bit different since we're concerned? Realistically, I've thought about things where, why can't we split groups up of birds as far as management wise go with their migration chronology? Because Scaup aren't the only late nesters, why can't we split them up versus some general characteristics about the species, like even go so far as say like a wetland obligate species versus, now, all ducks are wetland obligate, but is a mallard more dependent on wetlands than high quality wetlands than a Scaup or a canvasback? No. Like we talked about dry field feeding before and stuff. It's everything for them. So if we're looking at the ecology of these species and how they migrate across the landscape and how they use habitat, can we break them up into different ways where we're maybe managing them different, as far as like, hunter harvest and stuff like that, or getting population estimates at a minimum, and that's obviously where you get the harvest regulations. But I've always questioned that too.
If we truly care about the individual's conservation, if we truly care about the conservation of the individual species, and obviously we do because we've been on a restricted bag of Scaup for a long time, and if we truly care about the future of hunting, we do look at it harder, I think. And from this conversation, my head's swimming thinking, well, what do we know about redheads? What do we know about canvasbacks? And I've talked to some other smart people like yourself that say, well, canvasbacks are different. They're like you talked about, they nest earlier. They're more represented in the counts, and their population seems to be real stable with, I'm just taking away from this conversation, less variability in the estimates, so
exactly.
I don't know, but what about redheads? What about when you're talking about Scaup? What about some of these other species? I don't know. I don't know. So
well,
somebody
ask the question about ask the question about American widgeon. And that you can shoot 6-hand American widgeon if you want to. Do we really know that much about American widgeon? Yeah, probably they get counted. Not. They probably get counted better than Scaup do. That's for sure, because they do nest earlier, but they're a parkland nester. But then ringneck ducks. Minnesota DNR does a ton of work with. They had done a ton of work with ringneck ducks in the past, and they did some really good work over there. But in general, like, what do we really know about ringneck ducks? I know Delta's doing some work with ringneck ducks and with some transmitters and whatnot, but we don't know a whole lot about ringneck ducks. You can go out and shoot 6-hand ringbills if you want to. I don't know. Do we trust those estimates? Those are smaller populations compared to Scaup as well, like I mentioned. There's a lot of questions. It's not a perfect system, Ramsey, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but I am saying, hey, somebody a lot smarter than me, can we work together to figure this out? Can all of us kind of come up with something better, or modify what we're doing now to maybe answer some of these other questions?
Become truly adaptive.
Truly adaptive harvest management, right? for sure. I mean, we're not talking, they're not necessarily one and the same, harvest regulations versus, population counts, but obviously they inform one another, right? So,
well, Eric, when you talk to somebody like myself that hunted 20 some odd states this year, met with hundreds of hunters, shared a blind with hundreds of hunters, and it was a mediocre duck season continentally at best. Especially in the deep south, it was downright horrible. I think that anybody listening that had a horrible duck season would agree and support the idea of putting more money at better science for all species. Because mallards are a preeminent species duck. Don't get me wrong; they are the duck that drive duck hunting. But they're not the only duck.
They're around.
All of us listening. Of all the people listening, very few of us can relate to going out and shooting nothing but mallards. We shoot ducks. We shoot ducks respective to our habitat, respective to where we're hunting. Divers, other puddle ducks, some mallards, some pintails, geese. I mean, all these ducks deserve attention. And wow, that's an eye-popping piece of information and thought-provoking subject matter that we just stepped into. And it's the reason I wanted to have you on here to talk.
Yeah,
we need good science.
And that's what good science is predicated on, is that we continually ask questions and sort of challenge the status quo, right? So
that's right.
If we're not if we have unanswered questions and we're not happy with what we're seeing, I mean, we should be continuing testing that, right? And that's all I'm saying, really. And us as speaking as a duck hunter, I mean, who doesn't want to shoot more? I've got a very vested. Scaup's my favorite duck. They're one of my favorite ducks to hunt. Of course, I'd like to shoot more of them. So I understand what the duck hunter wants, but then, I also understand the other side of it quite a bit, and it's a complicated issue. But I say we sit down and talk about it because, one Scaup was pretty sad this year in North Dakota with how many Scaup we have coming through here. Free pass, but it's certainly a limited opportunity for guys that are, interested in going after a Scaup, or just the general duck hunter, right? Like, I'm just out on a marsh and I can't, maybe it's somebody that came to North Dakota, which we have a lot of visiting hunters here. Maybe they just want to come shoot ducks in North Dakota, and they're set up on a beautiful wetland, and they're gonna shoot the ducks that come in, right? Kind of like you and I do. We don't pass on spoonies when they come through the diver spread. And that limits the opportunity, because you might be seeing a whole bunch of bluebills and not much else on certain days in certain wetlands. And it's a good show, and guys, duck nerds like us can sit there and be happy about just that, but not everybody is. People measure by bag limit, unfortunately. For some people, that's why they're in the sport. For me, it's not. But yeah, I want more opportunity for everyone. I want to kind of hang on to some of these traditions that we've had of bluebill. That the bluebill are a big part of. Layout boat hunting, decoy carving, all that kind of stuff. So, you name it. It's kind of going by the wayside. I mean,
we always get wrapped around the axle, Eric. Every time you and I talk, we spin off like we do in person talking, and
yeah, we do.
Boy, you're right. What Scaup represent nationally in certain areas of the United States as an important species. I mean, you go up there to Chesapeake Bay, you get around to the Great Lakes, and blackhead decoys predominate. I mean, it's one of their bread and butter ducks. It just like, and I just keep thinking Havre de Grace. I've mentioned it before, but you get to Havre de Grace, black ducks, blackheads, canvasbacks. Those are the three big decoys up there. It's a very important species. More than duck hunting, get ducks is the lifestyle we all enjoy. It really is always duck season somewhere. Check out our caps, t-shirts, hoodies, and more at our new GetDucks.com store. That's GetDucks.com/store. Thank you for listening to and for supporting this podcast. And remember, life's short, get ducks. Well, that's why it was important to me to have someone with an informed perspective like yourself come and discuss Scaup. And it is to me, in the grand scheme of things, we are at a juncture in hunting. We all know Fish and Wildlife Service, state agencies, all of us recognize that there's a decline in hunting. And we hunters, our monies, our licenses, our stuff are footing the bill for conservation. And here's where I get with Scaup in particular. Here's what I'm trying to articulate. I was up in Havre de Grace, Maryland, hunting and meeting with some folks. And there's a lot of bluebills on Chesapeake Bay still. They call them blackheads. A lot of blackheads. It's a foregone conclusion. Go set up, go hunt right. You'll shoot your limit, one, on Scaup. There's tons more.
Yeah.
And, as I got to meet with some of these old timers, I was meeting with the Jobs brothers, for example. And they talked about growing up with their dad and their uncles and some of the old timers way back when, body booting in Susquehanna Flats.
Mm-hmm.
And the subject wasn't so much about just bluebills, but duck hunting in general and that tradition and growing up. And after the meeting, we were looking at some stuff and talking, and I was meeting with Charles, Job's brother-in-law. We just got to talking. He started talking about growing up and how when he was a young man, all the young guys went out with the old guys. The old guys, they were the leaders, and they bring along the young guys because body booting is an arduous endeavor. And you needed young bodies to move all that weight, all those decoys, all them stick-ups, all that good stuff. And he said, and now I'm the old guy, and there's no young people behind us, so we're having to do all the work. And his point being, it's kind of hard to motivate and get somebody, a youngster or young people, fired up to come duck hunting for one duck.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking pick a spot, Middletown, Midwest USA. We're talking about Havre de Grace, that just right there in the cradle of market hunting and duck hunting and all that history and all that tradition, and it's absolutely just dying on the vine. Hunting is, waterfowl hunting is, and so if the data supports, and it seems from your conversations that it does, if the data supports the increased bag limit, then it increases hunter participation at a time that we need an increase in hunter participation. I know some of you guys listening are shaking your head going, well, we don't need any more where I hunt. I get it, but overall the economy and the sport needs fresh people coming in. We need more hunter participation, not less. And that's what concerns me is in the instance of pintail, go spend a week or two hunting the rice fields of California and see those tens of thousands of pintails with 6 or 7 drakes per hen, and you can shoot one. But there are private organizations that advocate the take of 3 pintail, not to exceed one hen. That it'd be good for their conservation, and that would incentivize hunter participation. And so that's why it was important for me to get someone like yourself on here to talk about Scaup. It is a very important species to particularly upper flyway hunters, big water hunters. That's a very important species. Same as mallards in Stuttgart, bluebills on the Great Lake regions and the upper flyway is a very important species. And here's an opportunity, if the data supports it, to increase hunter participation. So, in your opinion, based on the data, based on their stable population, might we be able to shoot more Scaup without harming the population?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something needs to be looked at and evaluated, right? Because there is good science out there that suggests that hunter harvest isn't additive to the population mortality or the trends that we've seen. So it's certainly something that should be talked about with the appropriate people, and for all you and I know, it already is. But yeah, that information is out there, and so us as a hunting constituency, Ramsey, that's all we really want. We want to make sure that the best science is going into how we're managing our resources, right? And that goes for anything. So there's certainly room for discussion on that, no doubt. And a guy like me, speaking as a hunter, not as a biologist, I've got a really nice layout boat that sat in the hog barn this year because I wasn't going to go through all that work and do my normal thing and go to my great bluebill spots to shoot one bluebill and then just see a lot more bluebills come in. Now, I love watching ducks, don't get me wrong, and so do you. We also like shooting them, right? And it would just be hard pressed for me to to deal like. But that's how my region is. I mean, we have a lot of scaup that migrate through here. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that could be talked about. You know.
So you're saying, I mean, for you to go to the effort of doing your layout boat hunt, I know from talking to you, you love to do that. One scaup and you're done. But how many scaup might come in that place you hunt? Flocks of 50, flocks of 100?
Yeah, all day, nonstop, like many as you can count.
And if you go shoot 2 or 3, you might be more inclined to get out and participate in that sport.
Well, yeah, that certainly increases the fun. I mean, you know, especially when you know how a layout crew operates. It's multiple guys, and you're doing work, and you're taking your turns. So a lot of bird traffic is important, and yeah, just shooting one just doesn't quite give us the incentive to go out there. You know, obviously there's other species and stuff like that, but they don't always necessarily jive with, you know, when we get a lot of bluebills here, we got a lot of bluebills here. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you can sit in a layout boat in this particular area. Notice I don't give things away, you know, but
no.
This particular area, I mean, you'll sit in the layout boat and it'll just be nonstop bills for hours. And, you know, just that there's no incentive for it really. And I get it. So
Eric, you don't work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. You don't work for the state. Neither do I. We're hunters. Just talking about hunter opportunity. But you do have because of your past career, your research, your science, your personal and professional commitment to the species. You know a lot more about scaup ecology and populations and stuff like that than most of us listening. Do you think? I mean, I'm just asking a personal opinion of you. Mm-hmm. Might the bag limit of scaup be 2 or 4 or 6 or what would you if you could what would you propose?
What would I propose personally based on what I know? If I was the one calling the shots, and if any one person was really calling the shots, I would propose that we treat them similar to like how we treat a mallard population right now, right? So you're penalized for going, you know, you're legally penalized for going beyond whatever your set is for hens. It's the only species with a sex restriction. Mm-hmm. What is my argument would be, what's keeping us from doing that with pintails and scaup? So you're not gonna get a big boo-boo. Maybe you can shoot 2 hen scaup or 1 hen scaup, like you can in some states for mallard. Well, all states for mallard, it's either 2 or 1. But you let us shoot 5 drakes, you know. Mm-hmm. Why not? The opportunity is there. We know their sex ratio is skewed. We know that there's strong evidence that says we're not having the impact that we maybe thought we were with hunting them. So, you know, like I said, we'd never get there because we don't harvest enough ducks to impact them at the population level of bringing that sex ratio back per se. I can't say that definitively. But now the opportunity is there, right? So if we're strictly talking about managing harvest and trying to satisfy hunters based on what's out there, I would propose that, that we would have something similar to that type of a management strategy with them. Mm-hmm. And it seems in really stark contrast to like what we've seen with scaup over this the decline. You know. It wasn't just like a quick decision by the agency that manages them. It was, holy cow, we got to do something. And researchers were also saying, hey, yeah, we got to do something. And, you know, that had to be evaluated, right? Like is having these restricted bag limits on some of these species, in particular scaup, is that having the effect that we desire, that the populations will recover? Well, we're long down that road. And we've got other science that says, no, it's not really shooting them per se. So how long are we going to play the restrictive bag game, you know, where it's super restrictive? And I get that, you know, how we have a model right now. And if the Depop hits a certain number, here's what you get states. And I'm totally fine with that. But let's let's use some of the current information here to sort of inform some of those decisions. Because like Ramsey,
do you personally feel that more science is needed, or that or that under the current bag limits they are observing the best known science? What are your personal thoughts on this?
Yeah, my personal thoughts. I mean, more science is always needed. I mean, we're not, no scientist is out there making these just definitive conclusions on anything. That's not what we do, and that's not science. So yes, more science is needed. The second part of your question is do I think they're using science enough? Boy, I'm a trained scientist, so I'd always say no management agency is using science enough, because but the reality is you got to you got to come from their side of it too. Is they're just not driven by only science. That's what they want to do. But anytime you throw people in the mix and you're trying to make people happy, that complicates things, and it
gets political.
It does. It gets political, and that's getting political with science is something that I just won't do. I just consider it the two to be separate. I do want good science to inform good management, and that's what I think should be out there. So if we have new information, I hope that that's what we're acting on. At least having the debates about it, because ultimately what I'm getting at here from my personal perspective, Ramsey, is that the things you talk about the guys doing all the work and there's no recruitment behind it. Well, if we're losing duck hunters, which we know we are, and I think there's a pretty big consensus on from the human dimensions people through biologists to hunters, we know we're losing hunters and we're losing duck hunters. If we're losing them, why are we should be doing everything we can to promote and recruit new hunters, right? And science is one way we can do that. So yeah, I mean, ultimately I don't want to see, I grew up with a bluebill hunting dad, and my grandfather was the same way. And I remember those days, and I've lived through the tough times with bluebills. And I'd hate to see it just kind of all these traditional, whether it comes to like layout hunting or long line hunting, certain traditional areas, the Great Lakes, there's a lot of areas there that are really popular for hunting bluebills, and it's got a long tradition. Layout hunting, I would hate to see that stuff go by the wayside, because we don't think we have enough bluebills. You know what I mean?
Yep, that's my whole point, and it's just I just see an opportunity, and because we don't know, maybe we should know. I mean, I know a lot of individuals that work for that federal government agency and a lot of federal government agencies that are really, really good people. I mean, good biologists, good people, close friends. And I've got a tremendous amount of respect for them. But when you start talking about government agencies, now you're talking about, think of it as a government corporation, and agencies have corporate cultures, and one person, one team is just a little cog on a very, very, very big wheel, and we all know that all government agencies turn slow, and the last thing I think that I want, or that you want, or that anybody listening wants, is to fly off and ignore facts and imperil any of our beloved waterfowl species. But at the same time, this is a very important time in history. I mean, we hunters, call it what you want, ain't nobody out there hunting to live. It's a recreational interest.
Yes. Yep.
It's recreational and it's interest. And in the same way that I envision, our recreational interest in football generates billions of dollars of economy around that recreational pastime, so does duck hunting. And in duck hunting, or in hunting in general, a lot of those recreational dollars, that economy, goes into conservation, especially at the state level, but also at the federal level. And the last thing we want is for a species, for the public, to lose interest in a species, because if we're not interested in it, it ceases to have value. It's going to cease to exist. And other than just the encyclopedia level. And so my thoughts in listening to the conversation, and that we could be hunting possibly 6 Scaup, 1 hen, if it needs to be looked at, now's the time to look at it. Not 5 years, not 10 years, not 20 years, not a generation from now. Right freaking now is the time that we need we need to look at it. Hunting and wow, as I watch from afar the struggle to maintain duck hunting in Australia. It's halfway across the world, but they are us. They are. It's just like America, except it's Australia. I'm telling you, they've got a profound culture and everything else. But what's happened is, I predict that in 10 years, on the outside, maybe 1 year, maybe 2, in 10 years, duck hunting in Australia will cease to exist. Period. End of discussion. It's going to happen, not when, but if. And other countries are fighting this battle too. And I think that we Americans suffer from the delusion that it'll never happen here. Oh, it can happen. You know what I'm saying? And it's either going to be enough bluebill hunters for now saying it ain't worth it, and they're putting their boats up in the barns and collecting dust. Or I heard this year, on the 4th or 5th consecutive disappointing year due to migration or whatever going on down Louisiana, a lot of duck clubs are going up for sale. A lot of land is going out for sale. And when the duck hunters walk away from some of those marsh properties, they're just going to revert to marginal habitat instead of good quality habitat for ducks. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. But we've got to hold the line. And if a federal agency can look at something more rigorously, can create opportunities for hunter participation, I believe it's incumbent on them to do so. That's just my personal beliefs. I'm not arguing against science. I'm not arguing against the welfare of a species, but I'm saying, listening to you're saying, based on your extensive experience and understanding of the data, that hunter-related bag of Scaup is not additive to their mortality. It's just we're plucking some of that population that would die anyway, compensatory. Okay, and the numbers and the skewed sex ratio and the overall numbers and the stability of that population, which is all biased from a count. There's margin of error in here, but I'm just saying, if the limit could be more and would incentivize hunter participation in America today, we need it. We don't need it tomorrow. We need it yesterday.
No, I agree with you from that standpoint that, anything we can do to retain and recruit new hunters is, it's sort of the big challenge that we have because you and I both know that, especially if we're talking about a bluebill here, outside of the duck hunting world, there's very few that would ever know or pay any attention to what's been going on with them or what does go on with them. It is the duck hunting public that knows these things and cares about these things and invests their time and money in these things.
Yeah.
So you and I talk about this, and now that I'm on a platform where you got some listeners there. If you're a duck hunter out there, I don't care if you like bluebills or not. You can call whatever you want shit ducks, but we're all duck hunters. We're all this together, and all ducks, benefit from, hunter support. So if you're out there, one of the support your Ducks Unlimited, support your Delta Waterfowl, those organizations that are doing really good work, not only for hunters but for the ducks and the habitat themselves. But buy another duck stand. I mean, you spend a lot of money on other things that really are sort of overpriced. One thing that is not overpriced and should be, in my opinion, the price should go up on it. I had no problem with it. But buy more than one duck stand. Buy multiple duck stands because the efficiency of that money going straight to helping waterfowl habitat and manage waterfowl, the efficiency of that money is like none other. I don't remember the number, but it's in the 90 some cents on every dollar spent towards that goes directly towards conservation.
The word you used, efficient, is probably the best descriptor of a federal duck stamp. That has got to be those every penny that goes into a federal duck stamp is probably the most rigorously safeguarded, hyper-focused penny that goes into the entire federal government budget. And it goes towards what we want, which is more ducks, duck habitat, nesting habitat, not heated corn ponds up north. into duck habitat, into nesting habitat to produce more ducks. I agree entirely. It's a very important thing to do. And I'm just going to give Sam Sold Holtz, Pay It Forward, a shout out, because he is advocating buying multiple duck stamps to increase that budget, and he should be applauded. He has stimulated tens of thousands of more dollars going into that program. And so, just encouraging people to buy more like you just did. But Eric, I really appreciate you coming on. I want to wrap up this episode or towards the end of it saying this is, duck hunting is a participation sport. We talk about, you may not be the camp cook, but you roll up your sleeves and clean dishes. We all throw out decoys. We all bring good food, good booze. We share stories in the blind. We all get waist deep and put out the decoys and put them up, and we hunt and we pluck ducks and we cook them, and it's a participation sport. Duck hunting is a participation sport. But in light of this conversation, that throughout the United States we're looking at a species with a stable population that is thought to have additive hunting mortality, not compensatory. Compensatory, not additive. That we're not hurting the population with hunting them. That's got a skewed sex ratio. That the bag limit could possibly be considerably higher than it is, creating big opportunities for existing and new duck hunters. I would ask everybody listening, if one of you does it doesn't matter, but listen to me, guys. Google your state congressman. Call your congressman. Just call him. You're not going to talk to him. You're going to talk to a college kid wearing a blue blazer. He's going to say, hello, can I help you? And he's going to listen. He's going to take notes. And if enough of us listening will just call our congressman and say, hey, what's going on with the bluebills? Why is the limit only one? Why is Fish and Wildlife Service not raising the limit if it could be? If enough of us call, if 50 or even 100 of us call, let alone more of us, there'll be an answer, and we could effectuate meaningful change in duck hunting. That's how we, the duck hunters, the citizens of America, participate. We're not government employees. We don't call the shots, but we do have representatives in Congress, and they're just a phone call away. And so I'm gonna wrap up this episode asking everybody listening, whether you're a Scaup purist or not, or shoot these birds or not, pick up the phone and call. Just pick up the phone and ask your congressman, is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service looking at the Scaup population and the Scaup bag limit enough? Just ask them that question. Eric, wrapping it up, if anybody listening wants to get in touch with you, I love your Instagram handle, by the way. How can they get in touch? Because you pronounce it right. I pronounce Scaup with a W. And but what is? How can people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you after the show?
That's just your southern draw fit into the equation.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, people can follow me on Instagram. It's just me hunting with Ramsey and all my other buddies. A lot of pictures of decoys and birds and dogs, but. It is Scaup or My Mom Will Shoot.
I love it. It's very easy to remember.
Either get it or you don't. If you know Sylvester Stallone movies, you either get it or you don't.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for enlightening all of us on Scaup. Thank you very much for talking Bluebills with me today. And do you own a snow shovel? I bet you do, don't you?
Do I own a what? A snow shovel?
A snow shovel.
Yeah, don't say that word because we haven't actually had a lot of snow up here right now. So I don't want you to jinx us where I have to get out there and shovel or plow because it's been pretty nice from that standpoint.
I talked to my buddy Lee Chose the other night, and he was huffing and puffing still from shoveling snow. and I said, look, I got one simple rule in life. If I need to own a snow shovel to live there, I'm out. I just born and raised here in the deep South. We don't have to fool with that. But y'all stay warm up there, Eric, and thank you very much for coming on today's episode of Duck Season Somewhere.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ramsey. It was good to catch up with you again, and I'm sure we'll be shooting ducks again next fall when you roll back through.
Oh, it's gonna happen. We're gonna meet at Jeff Palaio's, and I can't wait. I had so much fun shooting divers with y'all. What was so? I just got to say this. What was so great is here we are. Sitting on a blind, targeting divers, and across that lake to the east was about, I don't know, 5,000 mallards feeding in the field. And we could have gone and shot a bunch of mallards, but instead we were out there shooting scaup, and it was a blast. It was fun, and it was pretty dang cold for that time of year. Last time I saw you, it was cold for a southern boy. And
it was cold. It was cold for a northern boy too. That was unexpected, and it was rough.
Yeah. But anyway, thank y'all very much, folks. Thanks y'all for listening to this episode of Duck Season Somewhere. You've been listening to my buddy Eric Smith. We've been talking scaup, and hey, pick up the phone, call your congressman, and just ask them, is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service looking at scaup bag limits as hard as they should be? Thank y'all. See you next time.